This is the case of one of the world's most elusive serial killers who went by the name Dr. No.
From the 1980s to the 2000s, many prostitutes were found to have been strangled and murdered by Interstate 71, which runs between Cleveland, Ohio and Louisville, Kentucky. There is no official number of bodies or deaths, but it is believed to be higher than 9. All the women were sex workers, and they were all strangled to death, and most were missing jewelry, clothes, or shoes. The Union 76 truck stop in Ohio was the biggest in the state, and it happened to be the place where many sex workers would go and where many truckers would stop to rest. On April 24, 1981, the first body was found in Ohio. The victim had a head injury, there were no signs of sexual assault, and she died from strangulation. She had no form of ID nor any belongings which could point to her identity. She was wearing a fringed suede jacket and thus was named Buckskin Girl. 37 years later, in 2018, she was identified as Marcia King of Arkansas. On June 16, 1985, the second victim was Marcia Matthews, who was 25 years old. She was found by a patrol trooper about a mile away from the Union 76 truck stop. She was badly beaten and also sustained some head injuries. She was rushed to the nearby hospital and unfortunately died 2.5 days after being found. The investigation which followed found that Marcia was last seen at the truck stop 2.5 hours prior to being found. The third victim was found a year later on July 20th, 1986. She was 23 years old and her name was Shirley Dean Taylor. She was also strangled to death. She was last seen at the Union 76 truck stop, similar to the previous victim. Witnesses claimed she was seen with a client called Dr. No, but nobody knew his true identity. In December 1986, the fourth victim was April Barnett, who was 18 years old. She was also last seen at the Union 76 truck stop, again similar to all the other victims, and again strangled to death. A couple of days later, the fifth victim, Jill Allen, was found. However, she was found in Illinois, a different state, but due to the MO of her death, the police classed her as a victim of the same killer. In February 1987, the sixth victim, Anne-Marie Patterson, who went missing at the Union 76 truck stop, was found 40 days later. Anne-Marie went on to be the turning point in this investigation. Prior to her disappearance, she was arrested for trespassing and informed the police officer about the murders. She told them she may know who was responsible for 3 of the murders, but was worried for her own safety, and so she chose not to share any more information. Before the police could ask her back for another interview, she disappeared. However, it is not known whether Anne-Marie was serious or whether she wanted to trade information for a lesser sentence. Either way, it was at this point that the police realized there was a pattern between the murders.
So far, the first 6 that we've spoken about here, it's given big serial killer vibes. The way they were killed, it all happened from one truck stop. This is not looking good. What was really interesting though, these were done across loads of different counties in Ohio, right? And I think that makes it super difficult for the police to share information, to talk it through, because imagine if the bodies are in loads of different places, they're all having to share information, or maybe they don't even know that it's a serial killer because it's happening in all different counties, so they all think it's isolated.
Yeah, so they don't think the cases are connected.
Yeah, because they don't know.
But then there's still that one thing that's tying all the cases together is that they were all seen at the Union 76 truck stop. Like, they've all last been spotted there, they frequent there, and then suddenly they all just get found dead, and they're all in different counties. There's 88 different counties. Maybe it was just somebody who was trying to play the game. I'll leave this one over here and this one here. They can't surely connect them. But
yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you, unless it's somebody that knows that this is the best way to almost get away with serial killing because of especially back then, communicating between the different groups of law enforcement probably was nowhere near as good as it is now, right? Yeah. Were they on the inside and they knew, if I do this, I'm going to get away with this a lot longer than if I just kept putting bodies in 1 or 2 counties. This person, to be fair to him, if it was done on purpose, extremely smart. Maybe they were just a trucker and it was because they traveled loads and were just thinking too much into it. But that's not what we do on the fellas.
6 months later, in August 1987, another victim was found who was believed to be around the age of 20. She was found with her jeans and underwear around her ankles but had no signs of sexual assault nor any drugs in her system. The forensics team concluded that the victim was thrown out of a car, but she had also died from strangulation. It is believed that she was pregnant and possibly killed within the 48 hours after her disappearance. In 2009, she was identified as 21-year-old Paula Beverly Davis by her sister thanks to the tattoos. Across the next 3 years, 3 more victims were found and all suffering a similar fate. All of these females were prostitutes and died from strangulation or brain injury. Having talked to several of the connections or family members, the police were able to come up with a suspect called Dr. No. The 8th victim, Paula Beverly Davis, had a pimp who came forward and told the authorities he last saw her get into a blue semi-trailer truck with white stripes. 2 victims were seen getting into a dark-colored tractor, and Dr. No is identified as having dark hair and maybe being Middle Eastern. It was actually due to a journalist called Michael Behrens who linked these cases together. He wrote an article for the Columbus Dispatch which claimed there was a serial killer on the loose, and he believed that the killer wasn't just killing in Ohio. At this time, sex workers would use CB radios to communicate with their clients, and he found out that Anne-Marie Patterson used a CB radio handle of Sleeping Beauty and had answered a call from a man who called himself Dr. No. She, however, had declined his offer as she was scared of him. Michael Barron published his story in 1991, and 10 days later, the Attorney General of Ohio had formed a special task force.
So we've been introduced to Dr. No right now. All these like code names, obviously we had Sleeping Beauty as well. I find it interesting that back then that was how they like communicated. Like WhatsApp wasn't a thing. Yeah, so they could have just all jump in a WhatsApp group and say, right, who's up for it? But also back then as well, as you can see from the journalist, they could tap into that so they could hear through it. And I think that's pretty interesting. This Dr. No person, surely within that industry, people are talking on the sly, like these sex workers talking to each other. Surely they would say, okay, don't chat to Dr. No, like he's really sus. Like, surely they all have more information on this Dr. No person than they're letting on. Because it feels like nobody really knows this Dr. No person. I mean, we had one person say no because she was scared of him. Yeah. But it's like, surely this would be more wider knowledge. They would know a bit more about it. Like, why are you scared of him? What have you been told? Do you know what I mean?
Surely she would have gossiped a bit and said, oh, this weird guy called Dr. No. Like, if you get a call from a guy called Dr. No, he's calling himself that. It's a bit strange. Maybe it was just some kink thing, though. She was called Sleeping Beauty, to be fair. It's also
it was weird. Code names. But I just feel like there would be more of a reputation. If she's got to the point where she's saying, I'm too scared to meet this person, then she can't be the only person that feels that way. There has to be other people that are like, you know, there's like a word going round. But she did actually try and speak to the police about this Dr. No person, and that maybe plays a bit more into the theory of, is this someone on the inside? Because if she's gone to him and say, I'm really worried about this Dr. No person, he's really scary, someone on the inside goes, right, we need to get rid of her, she's onto something here. And lo and behold, she did actually die. She got killed.
So Dr. No obviously found her, somebody found her, took her, silenced her.
At the time of these murders, truck stops were known to be an area where many sex workers would go to find work. The police began a big investigation where they interrogated many pimps, prostitutes, clients, and truck stop employees. With all the information they could gather, they concluded he was a tall man with dark hair, around the ages of 25 to 40 years old. He wore glasses and spoke with a northeastern accent. This description was put up at truck stops across Ohio and in 1,300 other truck stops in 9 other states. Forensic examiners couldn't find any fingerprints, hair, or any DNA from any of the scenes. However, they found sperm which they believed to be the killers. They tried to see if all the victims had the same biological sperm, but since they all engaged in prostitution, the results ended up being mixed, and there were no DNA ties to link all the murders.
So there was a $10,000 reward put up for any information which could lead the police to this Dr. No. But they ended up finding 5 people who had previously been called Dr. No. And nobody was charged with anything, right? Now this is the point that I wanted to make about these radios. If you had tuned in before and you'd heard someone say, I'm Dr. No and I would like blah, 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 what's stopping you from in a couple of days' time jumping on and say, I'm Dr. No, da da da. There's no way to verify. It weren't like there was a phone number on the radio. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anybody can be this Dr. No person. It can be a group of people is the point that I'm making.
It could be. It really could be. I mean, they said 5 people had previously been called Dr. No, but no one was charged. How many, it's not common for somebody to call themselves Dr. No.
That's very
5
niche.
people already calling themselves Dr. No is really strange.
Surely they had to look more into those 5 people. There has to be something going on within those 5 people. Why Dr. No?
They found 5 people who had previously been called Dr. No. Where? Where did they find them? Were they connected to the case? Were they 5 people calling in on the CB radios?
Who knows?
Need a bit more.
As a main indicator, many of the suspects had some link to tractors. Alvin was a 36-year-old trucker who owned 2 tractors. He was looked into by investigators as he previously abducted, raped, and choked a prostitute in 1986 and had attacked a woman in 1989. In 1991, Alvin Wilson became a suspect after his hair was found on some of the victims. Looking at digital forensics, authorities could place him in Ohio at the time of 3 of the murders, but placed him in jail for 1 of the murders. He was never officially found guilty in this case, nor was he found guilty in any other case, but he received a life sentence for the 1989 attack.
So here we have it. That is Alvin Wilson. Now, interestingly enough, his hair was found on some of the victims. Now, if you're a trucker, right, and this place is notorious for sex workers and stuff, the chances are, and if he's, I don't want to say addicted to it, but if he uses the services of the sex workers frequently, there's a very good chance that his hair would end up on them or their stuff. The bit that obviously throws him off of the serial killer vibe is because he was actually in jail for 1 of the murders, and that sort of rules out the idea, assuming, by the way, that these were all done by one person. We'll keep going through some of the list, but you'll see what I'm going to get at.
In 1994, authorities started looking into James Robert Cruz, who was a 36-year-old truck driver who had murdered a 17-year-old in 1993. The police realized that when James was arrested, all the murders had suddenly stopped and realized that his murder victim had a similar MO to Dr. No. However, they couldn't tie him to the murders and he was never charged.
I mean, that's a pretty good sign. If you've arrested someone, right, and all of the murders have just randomly stopped, you're probably thinking you've got the guy.
It's looking worrying.
Yeah, it is looking worrying for big James Robert Cruz. Unfortunately, just because his MO was similar, it doesn't mean that that's enough for them to tie him as the serial killer, and therefore he was never charged. Is it just a lack of evidence back then? I don't really know. We know that technology's come a long way, but yeah, that's a pretty tough one. A tough pill. You'd imagine the police were probably pretty fuming when they had nothing to tie him there, although it probably felt like he was the one.
Sean was another 28-year-old truck driver, and he was arrested in 1995 for the murder of a woman. When she was found, she was missing her clothes, and the police found a fingerprint at the scene which led them to Sean. Once he was arrested, he cracked and confessed to 2 more murders, one in Tennessee and another in North Carolina. Since he had a similar MO, a similar car, and the woman he had killed were also prostitutes, the police started to believe he was Dr. No. However, he was in school when the first murder took place in 1981 and was deemed to be too young. He was also in the army during other murders, and there are records of him being outside of Ohio when some of the murders took place. He also only obtained his license 3 years prior to his arrest in 1992.
Was looking like a prime suspect for a hot minute there until we realized, again, there were just a few things pointing away from him. A few things sort of kind of clearing him of it. But this is the point I want to make right now. I really don't think that this is one person's doing. Just because the MOs are all the same, we might have a case of copycats, right? Where these guys could have killed 1 or 2 people each. Was it a gang of them? You know, are these truckers that almost play in their own game? How many people can they kill with this particular MO? This is how we know if you had killed someone, it has to be done this way. Do you know what I mean? Is there more to that? For me, this is pointing too much, or they're forcing this to be a serial killer, when in reality, it could just be different truckers doing the same thing, because I heard one guy did it.
Yeah, like a lot of these guys have already committed a murder. Like the last 3 suspects we've talking about have been arrested for murder, or they've killed someone and it's been a prostitute, 17-year-old, whatever. Yeah. So they are guilty of doing the crimes, which is exactly what Mr. No does. Yeah. Some similar MOs. It could be the case, like you're saying, where it could be multiple people.
Let's keep going, and we'll see where we get to at the end here.
In February 2019, Samuel Legg was named as another suspect. He was another 49-year-old truck driver who had raped a 17-year-old near Ohio in 1997, which led to his initial arrest. She was hitchhiking with him when he raped her on Interstate 71, and the only reason this case was solved this late was due to technological advancements. Later on, using DNA which helped solve the rape case, the authorities found him guilty of 4 murders in Ohio and Illinois. This DNA helped to link him to the 1992 murder of Sharon Kudzersky, the 1996 murder of Victoria Jane Collins, and the 1997 murder of Julie A. Conkle, and made him a suspect in the 1990 murder of his own stepdaughter, Angela Hicks. He was already a suspect in the case of his stepdaughter, but there was no evidence to charge him with, and so the case was closed. However, after these findings, it was reopened. There are some claims which say he was arrested in 2015 for trespassing when trying to get into someone's car outside of a McDonald's. In May 2021, he was ruled as incompetent to stand for trial for both the murder and rape charges. He's been diagnosed with neurosyphilis and schizophrenia, according to the Ohio Attorney General's office. However, although many arrows and facts seem to point to him, Samuel was only 12 years old at the time of the first murder.
So you're telling me I've just listened to the entirety of your voiceover only to find out that he was 12?
He was 12.
He was 12 at the time of the first murder. Guys, he's not doing it. He's not doing that at 12.
What if he was like an extremely strong 12-year-old? Is that completely out of the question?
He's not driving a truck at 12.
I've seen some crazy 12-year-olds, I swear.
I agree with you. But look, I am writing this off. There was a load of stuff that really pointed to it, but literally the idea that he was 12 at the first time of the murder. But again, this could point to the fact that there's more people involved. Yes, he was 12 at the time of the murder, but he's obviously got a pretty terrible track record. So let's go on to the next one.
There were many other murders which were similar at the time. 43-year-old Sharon Lynn Kudzersky had disappeared from Miami Lakes. She was eventually found, and all fingers pointed to Dennis Hetzel, who was a truck driver. They linked Dennis to her murder as his bite marks matched the ones on her body. However, he was indicted but never went to trial. Police are unsure as to whether he had any involvement in any of the Dr. No cases. There are also believed she was the victim of the serial killer Lorenzo Gilyard. So although the MO of the murder was similar, she was a victim of someone else. That leads to the question of, are there more victims by the same serial killer? Or are all these victims killed by different people?
Chip, be honest with me. Do you believe that Dr. No was one person?
I don't. I think 3 of them might have been by one person he was picking them up from the Union truck stop. I think like 3 of them, maybe one guy. But the rest, I think, are just all truckers doing similar killings. Yeah. Like, it just happens to be a coincidence.
I want to agree with you. I don't know why, but in my head, I see it as if these truckers almost have like a game amongst each other.
I don't know.
These sick truckers. Maybe I'm just getting a bit too wild with the theory here, but what if, even if it was like 3 or 4 of them, and they're all just a bit fucked up, they said like, their lives are boring, let's make a game out of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's potential. It sounds like a movie.
It does, yeah, and that's the point. Maybe I'm going a bit far, but guys, we'd love to know what you guys think about this. It's really annoying that there really is no stand-out suspect here. They all like kind of point towards it, and then right at the end it'll be like, oh well, he was 12 at the time.
He was 12, but it still could have been him, I'm telling you.
Maybe. Let us know down in the comments though, guys. Really appreciate you tuning in to this week's Fellas Mysteries. Tell them what they need to do. Chip.
Just subscribe, turn on notifications as well so you don't miss an episode. We upload every Monday, 6 p.m, and we'll be back next week.